In today's class, let us discuss about how to create multiple threads, right? As we know that in order to create a thread, we need to write a class that implements runnable interface, or we need to write a class that extends thread class. But right now, in order to create multiple threads, I'm going to write a class that is going to implement runnable interface. So here I'm considering a class called sample, which is which implements an interface called runnable interface. So since my class sample is implementing runnable interface, I need to implement a method called public void run. So inside this run method, I need to write the code that my thread is going to execute, right? Yeah. So this is the step one in order to create a thread. That is, we need to write a class that implements runnable interface. In step two, we need to create an object of a thread class. In order to create an object of a thread class, let me write a constructor called sample, right? So inside this constructor, let me create an object of a class called thread. So this constructor takes two arguments. One is the first argument is object of a class that implements a runnable interface. And the second argument is the name of the thread. So let me take the name of the thread as thread name, and let me pass this thread name as argument to this constructor, and let me specify the type of this thread name as string, right? Is it fine? Now, so this entire thread, let me store in a variable called t, and the type of t is thread, right? Thread. And let me take one more instance variable called string name, and let me store the name of the thread inside this variable called name, right? Thread name. Yes. Now let me change to this as name. Is it fine? So here successfully I have created a new thread, right? So this thread, let me try to print. Let me print this thread, that is system.out.println. Yes. Now let me execute this thread. In order to run this thread, I need to call a method called start method. So once I call the start method, control jumps inside the run method. So inside the run method, I need to write the code that my thread is going to execute, right? So now let me write a code inside this run method for int I equals 0, I less than 5, I plus plus. Let me print the name of the thread plus the value of I, right? And next, let me make this thread to sleep for 1 second, right? Now, as we know that sleep is a method which throws interrupt exception. So that's why this entire code must be placed inside this try and catch block, right? Is it fine? Yeah. So let me adjust the code. Let me place this entire code inside this try block. Right? Next, let me write one system dot out dot println. Let me write here, just I'm writing the thread is exiting, right? Now, you understood the code? Anyhow, now what I've written here, inside the run method, I've written a for loop, right? So this for loop will start at 0, it goes up to 4, and for each iteration is going to print the value of I, and for each iteration I'm making my thread to sleep for 1 second. In other words, I'm making the thread to suspend for 1 second, right? Right? Now this entire code I placed inside this try and catch block. Why? Because sleep is a method which throws an exception called interrupted exception. So that's why we have placed the entire code inside this try and catch block. And next I'm trying to print a statement which states that the thread is exiting. So when the thread gets exited, the thread gets exit once it finishes its iteration, that is once it finishes executing from 0 to 4, right? Now let me create a thread. As we know that once we run the program, by default the main thread will start executing. So inside this main thread I need to create a child thread. In order to create a child thread, I need to create an object of a class called sample, right? So once I create an object of a class called sample, the control immediately jumps to the constructor. But my constructor is taking one argument which is of type string. So that's what I need to do. I need to pass a value. So let me pass a string value called 1, right? So once I create an object of a class called sample, what's going to happen? The code inside this constructor gets executed, and inside this constructor I'm trying to create a new thread, and the new thread what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to print. So once I'm trying to print the new thread, then I'm trying to execute the new thread by calling t.start. So once I call t.start, the control immediately jumps to the run method, and the code inside the run method gets executed. In other words, is the code that a new thread is going to execute. So right now here I have created only one thread. Now the question says that I need to create multiple threads. So in order to create multiple threads, what I should do, I need to create one more object of a class called sample. I need to create one more object of a class called sample. Now instead of passing 1, let me pass 2, right? So the first statement creates one thread, and the second statement creates the second thread. In other words, the first statement creates one child thread, and the second statement creates the second child thread. So let me create one more child thread, and the third statement creates the third child thread. So right now, with respect to our program, inside the main thread, I'm trying to create totally 3 child threads. As we know that when we create multiple threads, the child thread must be the last thread to finish its execution. So in order to make sure that the child thread will finish its execution at the last, so what we need to do, we need to obtain reference to this main thread. In order to obtain reference to the main thread, I need to call a method called current thread, right? So this current thread is a static method, so that's what I can do. I can call with respect to a class name called thread dot current thread, right? So this let me store in a variable called t, and the type of t is nothing but is thread, right? Now let me make this thread to suspend until all my child thread will finish its execution. I repeat, I need to suspend my main thread until all my child thread will finish its execution. Let me suspend or sleep this main thread for 10 seconds, right? So that's why I've written 10,000 milliseconds. 10,000 milliseconds is something but it is 10 seconds, right? Now let me place this code inside this try and catch block, right? And this catch block remains same. Let me copy and let me write main thread exiting. You're right. So finally, I need to make sure that my main thread will finish its execution, right? So once we run the program, my main thread will start executing. So inside this main thread, I'm going to create a child thread, right? So first child thread I've created, then the code inside the constructor gets executed and the control goes inside the run method. And then what I'm trying to do, after printing the value of I, I'm making my first child thread to sleep for 1 second. So once my child thread sleep for 1 second, I'm going to start the second thread, that is the second child thread, and immediately control goes to the constructor and the code inside the constructor get executed and the code for second child thread will get executed, right? Now inside this code, again I'm making my second child thread to sleep for 1 second. So once my second child thread will sleep for 1 second, immediately I'm going to start the next child thread, that is the third child thread, and the code inside the constructor gets executed and the code for the third thread will get executed, and again I'm making my third thread to sleep for 1 second. So let me check this behavior by executing the program. So let me run this program. So in the output, first the first thread has been created and next the second thread has been created and then the code for the first thread has been executed and then the first thread has been suspended. Since the first thread has been suspended, the second thread started executing and then the second thread is suspended. So once the second thread is suspended, then the new thread, that is the third thread, has been created and the code for the third thread has been executed and then the third thread has been suspended and next the second thread started executing and next the second thread is suspended and then the first thread started executing. So like that it goes on until all the child thread has finished its executing and then finally the main thread will finish its execution. So that's what here in the output we can see the child thread has finished its execution. So that's why it is printing exiting to exiting. Next the first thread has finished its execution. So that's why we are getting 1 exiting and finally the third thread has finished its execution. So that's why we are getting 3 exiting and finally the main thread has finished its execution. So that's why we are getting main thread exiting, right? As we know that once all the child thread has finished its execution, then only the main thread should finish its execution, right? So that's why you see that in the program I have set delay for the child thread as 1 second. The delay for the main thread I have set for 10 seconds because my main thread should finish its execution at the last. That is once all my child thread has finished its execution, right? I hope you understood this program. Thanks for watching. Thank you. Right?